hour of discussion on the governor's finance proposal. And we really are at an extraordinary moment, as Linda mentioned earlier, with the governor picking up an idea that Mike Kirsten, Goodwin Liu, and Alan Burson proposed 5 years ago with regard to finance reform. Our last governor sort of raised expectations and then ran from it when the recession came. And now we have a governor who has embraced the idea, not only done that, but gone out and gotten money for it through Proposition 30, and has fully embraced it on the upswing in the economy. And last week vowed to, quote, fight with everything I have and whatever we have to bring to bear for the passage this year of his local control funding formula. So the governor's really changed the discussion completely. So now it's really, we're going to discuss perhaps about some of the ways it should be changed, but it really is a given that high-need students will need more money, additional money. It's not a question of if, but how much and how quickly. And the legislature had been giving local control when it cut the budgets and said, you figure it out. So now that we're getting additional money, we really are going to give them flexibility in ways that they didn't have it before, and he's introduced the principle of subsidiarity. And we really have three basic principles behind the governor's proposal. One is uniformity. The dozens of categoricals that Jennifer talked about will actually disappear. And basically the same amount of money for students with similar characteristics. And there will be actual flexibility and local control and decision making. And finally, there will be equity, a move towards equity, the recognition that high-need students do require additional resources. So there are three basic questions that we'll explore today. Can we provide a more equitable funding system while meeting the basic needs of all students? How far down the road towards equity and adequacy will this take us? Second, what is the balance between giving districts more control over spending priorities and holding them accountable, particularly for the extra dollars that high-need students will get? And third, if the local control funding formula isn't perfect as it's proposed, then how should it be reshaped? And we're really fortunate today to have a terrific panel with us. Richard Carranza became superintendent of San Francisco Unified in June 2012. He was Deputy Superintendent of Instruction, Innovation, and Social Justice at the district for 3 years before that. Richard is in the center. I'm not sure you can read his name tag. Liz Guillen is Director of Legislative and Community Affairs for Public Advocates, a nonprofit law firm and advocacy organization dedicated to issues of social justice. Mike Kirst, President of the California State Board of Education and Professor Emeritus at Education and Business Administration at Stanford, and as we know, the co-author of the funding formula that we'll be discussing today. Mike, second down. Robert Miyashiro is Vice President of School Services of California, who's an expert on Prop 98 and the state budget. He spent 22 years in fiscal agencies in the state government before joining school services, and he knows where all the dollars that are supposed to be going to education are buried. Am I right? And Eric Andrew is Superintendent of Campbell Union School District, and before that, previously he was Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services at Glendora Unified. Eric, far right. So we want to give our panelists a little bit of time to give their overall perspectives. Well, let me try and frame it if I could. So Mike, why don't you start? It's taken a few years to get here, but how close to your vision is this formula? And what are the components that are essential and should not be compromised?
Well, the proposal is very close to the vision that Goodwin Liu and Alan Burson and I laid out. Indeed, it incorporates every major component except one. We recommended that there be cost of doing business or cost of living adjustments between the various counties across California, that it costs more to run a school in San Francisco than it does in Modoc County, and that part of the proposal was not included. But let me say that I want to frame this a little bit bigger historical context. Indeed, we're at an EdSource conference, and I was on the original creation of EdSource years ago, and it was called the Coalition for Fair School Finance. And it is noteworthy, and the audience should understand, that basically nothing has happened since that was formed in the middle 70s. This is your chance. If we blow this one, I don't think it'll come back very soon. So the stakes are extremely high here. There's been no change in the rationale of the underlying system ever since I began in this business in 1969 in California. I believe the opponents have no real defensible alternative, and their strategy has been to sort of love it to death, to say, oh, we think the governor's proposal is good, we need more equity, but, and then they have all these buts that have essentially gut the proposal in many crucial ways. So watch out as you hear people for the but, because that's very crucial. The current system has created a small army of lobbyists and consultants who were created to protect the existing system. They adhere to the hardening of the categories, and so it's a powerful group that opposes us, backed up by various support groups. I think the opposition strategy has been to obscure what you heard this morning, but to try and define this as a fight between winners and losers. And as you saw, really, if you looked at Jennifer's slides, there aren't going to be losers in this, it's relative winners. And so that definition of it, which has been the framing, I think is really not effective. Moreover, the opponents seem to have some golden era of the year 2007, where they think the finance plan was correctly designed. As you saw from the prior proposals and presentations, that can't be true in my view. And therefore, 2007, or sort of a plea for restoring what we had before the recession and then moving forward, is a road to no reform. So in sum, this is the best chance in many decades to create a major haul of the finance system. It is essential that we overhaul the finance system to implement our vision of Common Core curriculum. You can't implement Common Core curriculum when you have 42 categorical programs and an unequal finance system. So this is not just money, this is our vision of education in the future that you'll hear more about this afternoon. The administration has listened to the problems and made many adjustments. The May revise, for example, will include a pretty much complete rewrite of adult education. So we're still listening, but I want to warn people that this isn't going to come back very soon, and we are in the fight of our lives, and you need to know that the stakes are high with no change in 4 to 5 decades. Is it now or never?
All right, thank you, Mike. So Robert or Mr. Butt, I don't know. So there's a lot of talk about winners and losers. Is the measure, should we measure it as to what districts would get if there were no formula and compare it with what they would get under the formula? Or is there a recognition that, in fact, high-need students need additional money so that there will be comparatively less, perhaps, for other districts? Respond to that and perhaps what Mike has raised.
Okay, thanks, John. I guess one thing that I think is getting lost in the overall conversation, and we very much agree with Jennifer Kuhn, the broad architecture of this model is sound. It's got a sound underlying ideology and framework, and at full implementation, I think this is certainly the way to go. Now, in the meantime, and the meantime, per the governor, is 7 years, is the mechanism of how it will be implemented. And I think the distinction between what it looks like when it's fully implemented and what it looks like during this phase-in period has revealed some areas that can be improved and can be fixed. And School Services has identified a number of things that we would like to see fixed, because at full implementation, this will be a robust and, I think, a long-standing formula, but we wouldn't want to see it either fail because some of these mechanical issues some consider are not addressed, or because these near-term issues cause the whole thing to fail. So a few of the issues that we've identified that during this implementation phase we think pose large problems. During the implementation phase, not all school districts will receive their full cost of living adjustment. That's the way the mechanics work. In next year, the inflation adjustment is about 1.6%. The governor's plan funds districts movement 1/10 of the way toward their overall goal. And for districts, that means their cost of living adjustment will only be 1/10 of that COLA. The same thing is true for enrollment growth. The way the model is written, and we've heard from the Department of Finance that they intend to rewrite this component of it, but during implementation, you get 1/10 of your enrollment growth funded. These are pieces that, once it's fully implemented, won't be an issue at all. But during implementation, we think it can be rewritten to address these issues and then provide for a much more robust formula going forward. One other thing that I think I just want to throw out as a kind of maybe the political backdrop to this, if I might. Ken Hall, who is on the EdSource board, and I were giving a little address to the students in the USC CBO program, and we were having a little impromptu debate about whether this will get enacted or not. My position was that this will get enacted. The governor usually gets what he wants, and this particular governor has a lot of influence and clout. He pretty much put Prop 30 on his back and passed it by single-handedly. He's got a legislature with 2/3 majority in both houses of Democrats, and he's got an expanding economy with revenues to work with. Ken Hall, having long tenure in this business, took the counter and he said, well, Robert, you know full well that when those computer runs come out and show individual districts either getting more money under this system or less.
The governor's finance. And we really ordinary moment, as Linda mentioned. The governor picking up an idea, Mike Kirsten, Goodwin Liu, and 5 years ago with regard to finance. Our last governor sort of raised expectation. The recession came, and now he has embraced the idea, not only done that forward through Proposition 30, has fully embraced it on the upswing. Last week said, vowed, fight with everything I have and whatever we bring to bear for the passage this year. Formula. So the governor's really changed. So now it's really, I mean, it's about some of the ways it should be changed, but it really is that high-needs students, additional money. It's not a question of if, but how much and how quickly. The legislature had been given when it cut the budgets and said, you figure it out. Additional money, we really are going to give them flexibility. We didn't have it before, and he's introduced the printing. And we really have three behind the governor's proposal. The dozens of categoricals that Jennifer disappear, and amount of money for the characteristics, and flexibility and local control and decision making, and a move towards equity. The recognition do require additional resources. There are three basic questions that we'll explore today. Can we provide a more equitable funding system needs of all students? How far down equity and adequacy will this take us? Is the balance between districts, giving districts more overspending priorities and holding them the extra dollars that high-need students will get? If the local controlling isn't perfect as it's proposed, then how should it? And we're really fortunate today to have a terrific panel. Richard Carranza became Cisco Unified in June 2012, Superintendent of Instruction, Innovation, and Social Justice 3 years before that. Richard is in the second, read his name tag. Liz Guillen is Director of Legislative and Community Affairs, a nonprofit law firm and advocacy organization of social justice. Mike Kirk, California State Board of Education and Professor Emeritus in Business Administration at Stanford, and as of the funding formula that we'll be discussing down. Vice President of School Services of California, who's in the 8 in the state budget. He spent 20 fiscal agencies in the state government before, and he knows where all the dollars of education are buried. Am I right? And Eric Andrew is Superintendent of, and before that, he previous Superintendent of Educational Services at Glen. Eric, far right. We want to give our panelists overall perspectives. Well, let me try and frame it. So Mike, why don't you start? It's taken a year, but how close to your vision formula, and what are the components and should not be compromised?
Well, the proposal is very close to the vision, and Alan Burson and I laid out. Indeed, every major component recommended that there be cost of living adjustments between the various counties across California, that it costs more to run a school in San Francisco than it does in and that part of the proposal was, but let me say that, frame this a little bit bigger historical context. Indeed, we're at an EdSource conference, and I was a creation of EdSource years ago, Mission for Fair School Finance. And the audience should understand that basically, since that was formed in the middle 70s, chance if we blow this one back very soon. So the stakes are extreme. The change in the rationale of the underlying system, I began in this business in 1960. I believe the opponents have an alternative, and their strategy love it to death, to say, this proposal is good, we need more equity, but these buts that will essentially gut the proposal. And so watch out as you hear people, it's very crucial. A small army of lobbyists and consultants to protect the existing system, to the hardening of the categories, and a powerful group that opposes us by various support. I think the opposition strategy, obscure what you heard this morning, this as a fight between winners and losers. Really, if you looked at Jennifer's slides, the losers in this, it's relative winners. That definition of it, which has been the frame, not effective. It seemed to have some golden era of the year 2000. I think the finance plan was correctly designed, proposals that, and presentation, in my view, and therefore, of a plea for restoring what we had session and then moving forward is a road. So in sum, this is the best chance in decades to create a major haul of the finance. It's essential that we overhaul the finance system, provision of common core curriculum. You can't core curriculum when you have 42 categories unequal finance system. So this is not our vision of education in the future this afternoon. Has listened to the problems. The May revise, for example, pretty much complete rewrite of an old education. Still listening, that this isn't going to come back very soon out of our lives, and you need to know that the state with no change in forward of now or never.
All right, so Robert or Mr. Butt, so there's a lot of talk winners and losers. Is the measure as to what districts would formula and compare it with what they would get recognition that in fact high needs still money so that there will be comparatively less for respond to that and perhaps what Mike has raised.
Thanks, John. I guess one thing that is getting lost in, very much agree with Jennifer Kuhn. The broad of this model is sound. It's got ideology and framework, and implementation, I think this is certainly now time. And the meantime, years, is the mechanism implemented. And I think between what it looks like when it's fully implemented during this phase-in period has revealed that can be improved and can be fixed. School Services has identified that we would like to see fixed. Full implementation, this will be, I think, a long-standing formula, but we wouldn't want to either fail of these mechanical issues, some consider, or because these near cause the whole thing to fail. A few of the issues that we've identified phase, we think pose large problems. During the implementation phase, not receive their full cost of living. That's the way the mechanics work. Here, the inflation adjustment is about the governor's plan, movement 1/10 of the way toward their overall. And for districts, that mean adjustment will only be 1/10 COLA. The same, the way the model is written, and we've heard from the Department of Finance that they intend to rewrite this component of it, you get 1/10 of your enrollment growth funded. These are pieces that, once it's fully implemented, won't be an issue at all. But during implementation, we think it can be rewritten to address these issues and then provide for a much more going forward. One other thing that I think I just want to throw out as a kind of maybe the political backdrop to this, if I might. Ken Hall, who is on the EdSource board, and I were giving a little address to the students in the UBO program, and we were having a little impromptu debate about whether this will get enacted or not. My position, the governor usually gets what he wants, and this particular governor has a lot of influence and clout. Put Prop 30 on his back and passed it by single-handed. The legislature with 2/3, and he's got an expanding economy with revenues to work with. Ken Hall, having long tenure in this business, and he said, well, Robert, you know full well, come out and show individual districts either getting more money under this system, less money under this system. Those individual legislators to vote for something that will hurt. And so we went back and forth on this issue, but 3 months ago, and you can see that start, and I think it's unfortunate because what it glosses over the fundamental of the program itself. And people just look at this and say, are we for it or against it? Are we still called? And I think degrades the debate about the merits of this meritorious fundamentally.
Good, thank you, Robert. So Richard, of the runs, San Francisco would not be the so-called winner under this because you, in fact, have a very diverse population of students. So why do you, tell us like the local control funding formula?
Opportunity to be here. I was introduced as a superintendent, but I'm a member of the 2nd District PTA with 2 children in public schools. I think I'm going to take a very pragmatic approach to this. It's unabashedly about equity because winners and losers, we already have losers, and we know where they come from. And to put this in perspective, I recently was an educational meeting to 4 other superintendents, and we met with educational officials in China, and there were 2 concepts that difficulty in explaining to our colleagues in China. With all due respect and apologies to those, was the concept of just couldn't understand that. That concept they just couldn't understand was this whole, and for my Chinese colleagues it was very simple. And those that score above a certain percentage get to don't, there's a lot of work for them to do. It was very, you spend your time trying to score a certain score on a test. It was very clear in his minds. We spent a lot of time trying to, it's not the way we work in America, because American dream, and you define what the American dream is, and it's predicated in one of its cornerstones, a well-educated populace. The melting pot, the salad bowl, that's our strength. That's what makes us innovative, because they wanted to know, how do you get your students to be so innovative? They're not very creative. Kind of ironic. This goes to the heart of the American dream. We believe that a well-educated populace is and by the way, I'm speaking as an English language learner who's kindergarten, then why wouldn't we be the funding formula for our schools? Kids that can't pass the test, just in passing the test. But let's put the kids that aren't being, we're not going to waste our time with you. Because the fund app is already creating winners and losers. And the historically underserved have solutions. And one of the things that I really appreciate with all of its many flaws, with all ages, is that the governor and his staff is looking to find success. And in San Francisco right now, schools no one wanted to attend, that people felt that were some of the lowest performing schools in the state of California. 3 years with very targeted resources that came from the federal government in the form. We've turned around, one of the slide points with schools, we turned around these schools in terms of parent involvement and participation, instruction, community engagement, professional development. Some of these, just visiting one of these schools now have parents and communities want to come to the school because it has a high level of academic achievement, and it's possible without the additional funding development to provide the support to parents and community that we needed, not from bashing teachers, to support the learning and the professionals. 3 years later, they're showing 6 times of San Francisco Unified as a whole. Nobody's running away from accountability. Making here is that this funding formula, while you can understand it, I can describe this formula to my Spanish-speaking and learner. I'm telling you, I can't describe the current formula in English. So I think it's a step in the right that the time is now. I completely agree with Mike. How long do our kids have to wait?
Okay. Eric, you come from a small district, this as large a percentage of high-needs student perspective on the formula.
Well, thank everyone for having a very important conversation we're going to have today. I do agree with Mike. This is the time, and we say this. Oftentimes in education, we talk about and et cetera, and what we really do is tinker. This is, and with 2 parallel initial now, with Common Core implementation and control funding formula, this is our time. There will be another set of generation will fall under the same practices, and those students, those students who need better opportunities to have better learning experiences, that some of us have gone down. Now, I'm going to be so I will tell you that up front. There's not, we need more discussion. I do believe that this is not a fixed growth mindset. There are people who are lots up with something to support the governor's proposal. Question about it, it is absolutely the right thing to do. Sucker's choice, in which there's a winner or a loser. We can all win. I take a look at we have 1,000, roughly 10,000, over 6.25 million students. The governor's proposal has some very stress a lot of the opportunities. I agree with Richard in the sense of the equity means giving students what they need to be successful. So that's a great part of what he's talking. I do look at the proposal and feel mine. I'm a very small district. We are a shade and revenue limit district. It teeters year. Interesting to hear some of the crowd who were to talk about basic aid districts, et cetera. So thank you for that support. But in looking at that, I take a look at the weighted, the formula known as the weighted student formula, is that district, I have high-end and low-end. These schools that will be cut significantly as a result of this proposal. Students of poverty and students of English need extra work. I am a person who went to EOP program. There was someone who understood student of poverty who recognized I had some, made sure I was able to get into college. So we that. Having said that, to look at the tenets of, along with the tenets of Senate Bill 69, similarities, and that we can look at the differences and see, are there ways in which, an example of that would be, as I look at, have about 48%, I would love, so for me, away from getting extra money. Instead of having it start at 50%, that we have a gradual percent of, if districts have X amount of above the 35%, that 50%, and bifurcate, actually set it up, or in quartile, so that more students have these professional development, because we all know, person in that room is a teacher, and if we can provide English language learners to do that, we'll have success. 3 years in a row, won the Look at Learn that really addresses the needs of English Santa Clara. I think we have some great things going to lose the momentum that we did lose in this particular case, $4 million. So that is a loss. I'm not referring to talking about actual loss of dollars in a way. So if we can find ways to schools and districts maintain at least, and as we take a look at the state and federal, we are seeing trends that revenues are up. I absolutely believe those extra funds should go to the. So with that, I
Good, thank you.
Mike.
B69 is the Senate proposal that Eric was referring to, which has changes to the governor's formula, which we can get into. Liz, I wanted to I know you're enthusiastic about parts of this and have concerns perhaps about the accountability piece. Give us your perspective, if you will.
First of all, I'm really pleased to be speaking to PTA members than I normally get to. I was just Thursday to the Sacramento PTA Council. We were talking about this important issue, and we're going to keep talking. Public Advocates supports the local control funding. We don't have buts about us strengthen to make it work. And one of the most important things, though, is that this is our moment. If we don't do this work that so many of us in this room have been at the late 90s, when we were talking about getting down to facts, the Governor's Commission on Ed Excellence. We've been talking about this for so long. The issue that Robert raised about willingness to go against who benefit now under current law is so important here. No new money should go out under the current system is flawed. It is inequitable. This change, we need to make it work. One of the most important aspects of strengthening the accountability provisions, the supplemental and concentration grant gets to the students that generated those funds. And an important way to do that is to parent and community engagement. Right now we have school site councils, English learner, and so forth. We think that remain, and the local control funding formula does our minimum, but we also think community engagement in the same way outcomes in local plans, that need. How can district community engagement, and there needs to be a budget alignment so that local control really means local, district and superintendent, community local. That's revolutionized. In terms of we feel strongly that it should be going forward. The Senate's plan to take the concentration grant to increase the base grant, but they would take that is supposed to go to low-income youth and spread that around the 6 million students in the state. That's, deep redistribution that really we want to see remain. And I spoke of that. To support parental accountability, really, we need strength and transparency. That finance is working on that. We appreciate that we're having with the governor's office. But we need to start using every district needs to be using how it reports what it spends. We need between districts and among schools within districts. And we need to have transparency site. Doesn't have to be complicated with this misery for districts in terms of just let us know what is each school site and how is it using the money and how site averages for the actual staff spent there. Why does that happen? These are things that we have heard over the years. These are things we have heard from the community partners that Advocates works with community-based organizations, including the PTA and partners. To get out there, make your voice in Sacramento. You can go to your local, let them know how important this is. That they can strengthen the parental and this has to happen now. There is no forward in the status quo fund.
Thank you, Liz. So the concentration times. Mike, why don't you take just a minute? What research basis grant the Senate omits this, not just among the base, but also the supplement. But
Yeah, the basis is a lot we read when we formulated the proposal. And I'd say the leading book is by a professor named William Julius Wilson called it. And that's been backed up by research. But Professor, when you have huge number who are low income, whose parents are case, living in communities where they hear very little English spoken in the schools, grounds, in their neighborhoods, very little money and ability for children. When you concentrate those people, high percentages into these petitions, you get a much bigger education. So that's why I object to the idea of, say, a slide concentration, because it's not a sliding scale percent. The research shows tremendous impaction. You get a lot of problems added to in California by the English learner issues where we're not a strong state for
I
funding.
mean, just to clarify, I think on the way it works is 100% or 95% learners and low-income children, you would get more of this than if you were a district with 50%. Yeah. Okay. So one of the issues we're having definitions, and I think that we can what hold harmless means. The governor says you will be restored to the 2000, and if I hear Eric correctly, saying in fact that, and perhaps Robert, maybe you and Eric could say hold harmless mean to you. Can we reach a definite jump in afterwards? Yeah, go ahead, Robert.
All right. Well, so the explanation is that the base grant, uniform amount for all school districts or grade spans that Jennifer pointed out, the funding level that school district would have received if we had no go through the recession. The funding level would be 708 level with all of our deficit cost of living provided. Point though is on what dollar amount? Provided on what we call the base, that is the general purpose money that all school districts. So the notion of hold harmless at base revenue limit adjusted for the for cost of living, and this is where it becomes very confusing. The way the formula will work is that also receive right now funding for student assessment, for staff development, funding and facilities maintenance amounts under the formula out at full implementation. Now, for most districts, what will of those monies will be the monies, the supplemental and concentration grants you have in those areas, the more money you will receive. Itself squeezes out monies current districts for those other purposes. District that has little to no students, 7 years from now, is that base revenue limit. So I think because of the you can make an argument that no one loses time. Those dollars received, those dollars will squeeze out to zero.
Where you come in terms of what you
Exactly
described.
what was at our district 7 years out, that's where I lost, was based on that actual formula.
So,
Yeah, I wanted, again, this is the idea of going back to, and that the 207, therefore we need to go back to base it on that. And so I think that's part of it. I think the idea of the legislature historical funding from 207 and that is really remote. So, case, it's really trying to rather than looking forward.
Linda mentioned earlier, perhaps in professional development and Common Core, planning is, at least as it's outlines of decisions, how much money one would spend on textbooks and the like would be left up to each. So are there certain programs, I know the career tech community one should be outside of this formula. Perhaps it's, if we come up with too many, we have no formula again, right? Some programs that one can, perhaps you have some, what you think. Anybody? Richard?
Yeah, I think, again, I think it's the wrong question. If we're truly talking about accountability for students, then you're going to take into account the need for, California and all level with the issue of dropouts. Kids vote with their feet. They're connected to technology. They're doing research. Schools, for the most part, they're told to turn that off. There's no alternative. So how do we educate kids? New real project-based learning. That's where we're going in terms of learning. So autonomy, the defined autonomy, and I as a superintendent want to be for school learning, will be part of my plan with professional development. It'll be part of my plan but it will be a community plan that we're not siloing programs that we know if we just had a little bit more actually do this, which my community, I think that's the wrong approach to be looking at let's de-silo and let's let the community determine what the priorities based are and then hold each other accountable for that.
Anyone else? Really? There's
Yes, correct in identifying many of these activities, their basic needs no matter what. And formula does a pretty good job of outlining ability plan must address. There may be areas that could be that some of these needs occur. What I wanted Superintendent Carranza's be held accountable. There are superintendents out there at that level of accountability. And I think that's what local needs to push for.
Liz, just to follow up, I think it talked about parental involvement. So in order for us to make wise decisions, I think that it assumes others' voices will in fact be heard. As constructed, well, vary from district to district, but how parents get involved and their voices be heard more in some districts right now?
There has to be a greater focus and commitment included in the plan and funded to that involvement. It has to be meaningful. It has to be an effort by districts to train and work with the community. What's at stake? What's this money for? Not for? And how can it make a difference we want? And it's not just for parents and district people that don't understand it either. I think that it's an opportunity to craft a real vision, local control, and funding that. Research happen on the natural. That's what we're seeing in ELAC. The lethargy, and how many waivers does the state board get people to participate? That's because they fail at something. Why should they go to a meeting when going on? That's not very encouraging. Support meaningful engagement behind it, and we should start looking at the groups that are all work. Groups that have been committed to improvement. They have good ideas, and they have.
And then Richard.
If you have students in schools, raise your hand. I'm going to give you homework, and those of you who don't, homework as well. I always do this when I speak. Important that as parents, as community members, share your voice. You are the biggest advocate. Superintendent, and as a principal, you to rubber stamp any plan or program that we put forward needs to be heard. So it's important and incumbent on these various meetings, incumbent on the district to show, here's the proposal, here's what we're going to do, but for the school district people here is that we go to the community and ask the community to come to us. To where the people who we want to reach be transformational as well. Oftentimes we'll have a PTA meeting or a DLAG meeting, have 30 parents there, and we should have 5. We've done everything we can. We've sent out flyers, phone call things, but we really aren't reaching them. So as a result of that, we have to go to you. Of communities that we can go to their departments and those types of things to ensure that we have we have made a great effort into the mix and not depend on parents. What we have said, and that's how we, and that's what
Okay, thank you. Richard, quickly.
Very quickly, actually, with my Chinese reasons that I said that local school boards are so important and participatory reason, they are local level. One thing well known is that San Francisco Unified has had a wait 2006. It's unfortunate, though, that the state funding has deeply been ramping up. That notwithstanding, in options, but that notwithstanding, I will tell you one of the intended effects of our weighted student vitalized, there was a renaissance in our school site ELACs, in our DLACs, the convening. Every school has to have a single site plan. It's vetted in the community. The district's role is to have a school year where we bring representatives from the community. We help train on how to decide the budget and understand the budget priorities. Have had to be very clear. There are some communities where we would get hung up, talked about equity, but our community understands what we've done the work, and we're continuing to try to understand what we mean and put definitions.
Thank you.
So I'm here to tell you that weighted student funding is a process. It's not, but it will revitalize your engagement.
10 seconds.
Just very quickly, I have ideas of these school site councils. A lot of these are hooked to very narrow. And at one point when I was 80, I think the state had specified about 50. The challenge for the PTA here, PTA was one of the original founders along with League of Women Voters and AAUW of EdSource, is to bring parental involvement not around narrow purposes and categories, but around the bigger purposes of school improvement out today and that Richard referred to. And so people not on narrow purpose historical streams, but how would you see the money it's a new agenda, and I think of the school site councils of the past, it needs to be transformed in California.
Good, thank you. So now of your questions, we have microphone. If you would like to come up and ask questions. We don't have time for, please.
My following. Why is it that the base is too low? It is an argument against funding formula. What we have is underfunded education. We're hearing about in other states. When we talk about it's because we don't fund enough. Argument is about local control funding. The public is not going to hear that we.
All right, thank you. Good question. Let me just, that's a great question. Slightly, at the end of 7 years, we're talking about 16 billion revenue coming in. So how far will that take us? Adequacy, any combined with that question? Anyone?
Everybody knows what is adequate in the state, right? We shouldn't confuse what the governor's proposing, the adequacy. The governor is proposing equity. Support that, and we should take the opportunity. Adequacy. That's why there are 2 school finance. The PTA's lawsuit, Robles-Juan suit, Campaign for Quality Ed suits. We call for funding adequacy. We're not going to get what it takes until that we have researched it and identified. It's good that the local control funding formula is going up.
Okay, anyone else? Robert, what is adequacy?
I step back a minute ago. We enacted Proposition 98 was intended to provide funding for schools. It has formulas in there, but the whole idea behind schools are the kind of fundamental response, and that as revenues grow in proportionate terms. Later, California is further than when we started out in 1988. Control funding formula operates in that overall constraint. And about this issue more broadly, fundamentally about Proposition 98 itself, because the governor working within the constraints of that years is that, and not just this governor and not just the enactment of a Proposition 98, every effort is made how much money goes to schools, formula, to provide some relief for the other side of the services have pointed out many manipulation Proposition 98, and this is a budget, but move toward higher levels of funding if we remain under this so-called minimum protection. We have to really look at that issue.
Thank you. Quickly, Mike.
Yeah, one minute. When people talk about more moving towards adequacy, people correctly, would you take the increased money into the current formula that we now have? Formula for distribution inhibits more funding because it's viewed as irrational, incomprehensible, and totally screwed up.
All right. Please identify yourself as well.
My name is a research fellow at the American Institutes for Research, and I've been studying this stuff for about 40 years. First, just a quick comment on Liz's. I will take issue that it hasn't been. It has by many people. I've been one of them, and years ago indicated that we 30 to 50% in adequate education in California. That said, let me just put out 2 questions. Having worked with me many years ago at Stanford at the Educational Finance and Governance is anticipating one of geographic cost differences. We all know the answer to the question, how much more or less employ comparable teachers in different locations, and these issues are important. You mentioned that one of the geographic cost differences were in the current formula. My previous suggests there's anywhere from 20 to 30% in lowest cost districts in the state. The first question is, that you might be looking to take care of those labor market factors. I'm sorry if I'm...
Jay, you get one. Sorry. Have a response to that. Is there any chance of...
It's obviously any formula will be, but right now there's no active. Hasn't been much pushback on it. I just in the discussion about it. So it ended because when it was left out, nobody put it back in.
Okay, question.
I'm in San Francisco, and this is a question for a couple of questions actually. What's our district going to do to ensure, what kind of place to ensure accountability and transparency from administrators to school site councils? What is presented on paper in our basic BSE and our budget, and another happens in reality. So that's one. I know that we do a great job with our school site council, our parents, but I think that there needs to be more, really reach out poor parent learners, so that they really get engaged.
Good, thank you. I think we get that sense.
Yes, a perpetual challenge of any school system we be aware of and know ground level in the school, in the classroom. So that's challenge, but that's something that is absolutely agree that we need to find, and I love what some of the panelists do in different ways of reaching out to the community and empowering community members. And then the question, I can't remember exactly what you asked, but I promise I'll catch you after. We'll talk.
Next question, brief.
Thank you. Very briefly, I'm community, which I teach in and also live in, has educated the members of school site councils. Really is just kind of a puppet mechanism for it. How can we ensure, what can we put in place to ensure those kind of community groups that involve actually well-trained and knowledgeable about what and rights are?
Same question. Any?
Yeah, one of the things that we do is we bring all of our and have the county of Santa Clara give council members. And so we do the elections, we make sure there's the parity, there's the right to understand the rules and regulations of what a school site council. Again, for them to be advocates and not just run with every school once a year. There's a true.
Good, thank you. Mike, real quick.
One sentence. It's a big problem, but I'm not sure you can fix a school finance bill. So I think we need to, in many ways, and not it as an addendum to the school finance reform.
The essential, otherwise, at the table, and then folks will realize. Last question.
Oh, thank you. My name is Fremont Unified being mentioned earlier on Council PTA, and I'm also on Fremont Unified School. When you talk about 14,000 and San Jose, it doesn't bring forward the fact that $1 million per year for Fremont Unified, $100 million in the last 3 years. So at moving forward this formula and not to try to make up for past, we can't do the technology, and so how do districts like ours who have not had cost of living afford it, and we have teachers coming to us, money is going to healthcare because we don't fund it, to make up for those losses that we have suffered.
Did you care to respond to that? A statement was made. A real question.
This is a question. My parent, all my best friends are
Yes.
special ed parents. Expensive to educate. The question is, will additional grant money for special?
You want to deal why special ed was left out of the.
It's a great question, and I think education needs a really serious look and over. When Goodwin Liu and I and Burson looked so complex, it's a system unto its own that we really decided that it was too much to try and redo the whole system. It deserves a major study. When I was in 82, 11% of special ed, and now it's over 21 are in special ed, and not the kids. 11% of the general operating, and now 21% of the general operating. So it is very, it requires almost a separate study at things that Linda Darling-Hammond brought up. It's a thing. It is how to improve our whole and of special education. It needs more study, and I look at that. I've been trying to do that on a state. I agree, it's a problem we haven't and need to deal with.
We had more time. I wish we had to thank our panelists for the frank and that they give us today.